Good evening. Good evening, and welcome to the City Talks. It's a great honor and pleasure that Joy Kagawa agreed to do this talk in our series. We're very excited to have her. She's indicated that she speaks very much in the moment, so she can't tell us much of what she'll speak about until she commences speaking. I'm not going to say very much by way of introduction. Rita Tremblay, the VP Academic and the Provost of the University of Victoria, has come to the talk and will introduce Joy. I just wanted to thank the Provost's Office for their support, co-sponsorship of this talk, as well as the Victoria Nikkei Cultural Society is also a co-sponsor of this talk and supporting Joy's visit. And we have, of course, our usual list of other sponsors as well. So, Dr. Tremblay, if you want to come up.
Good evening, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Joy Kogawa. I don't think I need, but it's okay. Thank you. Joy doesn't need any introduction. Author of the novel Obasan, Joy is today one of Canada's most respected and celebrated authors. Obasan has become a literary icon in the pantheon of Canadian writing. Published in 1981, it traces the remembering of Naomi Nakane in the early 1970s, the remembering of the uprooting and incarceration of Japanese Canadians, of family life before and during the internment, and Naomi's search for her missing mother and grandmother who had returned to Japan prior to 1942. Naomi's experiences are interactions with her Obasan and Oji-san, and her Aunt Emily culminate with her learning the truth about her mother and grandmother, that they had both died in the atomic bombing of Nagasaki on August 9, 1945. Published during the movement for redress for the uprooting, dispossession, and exiling of Japanese Canadians, Obasan became the poster book for the movement at that time. Even before Obasan was published, Joy was a respected poet publishing her first collection, and some of these include Splintered Moon, A Choice of Dreams, 6 Poems, Women in the Woods, and since then, after the publishing of Obasan, she has been very, very prolific writer. Her sequel, Isuka, which means Someday, was published in 1992, followed by The Rain Ascends in 1995, a traumatic account of how a woman discovers her father, an Anglican minister, was a pedophile. This was followed by New Poetry, A Sang of Lilith, A Garden of Anchors, Selected Poems. Her 2005 novel, Emily Cato, tells the story of redress in the context of post-9/11 dynamics. She was named to the Order of Canada in 1986, to the Order of British Columbia in 2006, and to Japan's Order of the Rising Sun in 2010. Joy's efforts and those of her many supporters and the financial support of the Land Conservancy saved her family home in Marpole from demolition, and it has been preserved as Kogawa House, a sanctuary and home for writers in residence. Joy is currently the Jack McLaren Writer in Residence at the University of Toronto. Currently, Joy is reworking a new book, Gently to Nagasaki, during the writing of which she has struggled to come to terms with the events of 1937 in Nanjing and 1945 in Nagasaki. Please welcome Joy.
It's so good to be here. Thank you so much. And thank you to whoever it was that organized and arranged for my flight over here on a helicopter. It's the first time I've been on one, so I can take that off my bucket list. It just feels kind of strange to be treated so specially in this way. And it's hard to get rid of one's identity that is so deeply in one, you know, that to sort of, anyway, maybe that's part of the journey of coming to see ourselves in different ways. I was every once in a while I just feel like such a fraud, you know? And then somebody says something and well, anyway, so I'm supposed to talk about cities. That's the topic. 2 cities. And I have these 2 cities in my mind, Nanking and Nagasaki. And one might say, how come? Why are those 2 cities in my mind? They both start with N, N-A. That was my maiden name, N-A-K-A-Y-A-M-A. We look for these little things that join things together. They don't seem to have much sense, but we do that as human beings. We find little things that connect things. Anyway, Nanking and Nagasaki, what do they have in common? They were in Asia, and in the late 30s and in the middle 40s, things happened there that were unspeakable. Anyway, this title of the book, Gently to Nagasaki, I've had the title for the longest time, for years and years. This title was there, but there was no book to go with it. It's like a peg on the wall with no coat. So I struggled with this. You know, the title wouldn't go away. The title just stayed there. And so I thought, okay, what is this? What is it? Why is it there? Why is that title not going away? And why is Nagasaki in my mind anyway, Gently to Nagasaki, except that it's in Obasan? And how did it get there in Obasan? That part is fiction. It wasn't part of my experience. Well, when I first wrote Obasan, and I wrote the whole draft out and I presented it to the publisher, and the publisher that finally took it said, so what happened to the mother? She disappeared in Japan. And I said, well, I don't know. I've written this thing and I don't know what happened to her. Is life like that? Can we just not know? And she said, well, the reader has to know. So I took it back and I wondered, and I thought, well, maybe she's lost in a mountain somewhere, or maybe some family thing happened and she just couldn't get back. And I wondered and I wondered and I didn't know what happened to her. And at some point, and I don't know where the idea came from, is that she was at Nagasaki. And so I thought, well, who knows? I didn't know anything about Nagasaki. So anyway, at the beginning of the book, I put in the date, August 9. So there was a clue right at the beginning of the book. And then by the time I got to what happened to her, then I had an idea, but I didn't really know. And you know, life is so strange. It was a year ago when I don't know if I should diverge and tell you about that, but anyway, just very briefly, I ran into a person whose name I had known, whose name I had used, Nakane, which is in the book, Obasan. And I ran into this person in Los Angeles as I was just chancing to go by, and he was a street musician, and he glanced up and he recognized me, and there we were, and we were talking. And he told me, you know, I mean, the connections. I mean, he hadn't read the book, so he didn't know. So when he read the book, he was so startled to see his name. And he said, I thought it was a very common name. I just didn't know where that came either, Nakane. And he said that it's such an uncommon name, he's never met anybody except his own family. It was not common. I mean, I could have chosen any other name. It could have been Nakano, Nakata, anything. Well, why that? Anyway, so then, and it turned out in the book there's a Stephen Nakane, and it turned out this guy has a brother, Stephen Nakane. And Stephen was his favorite brother, who was the one who had enjoined him to do music, and so there he was doing music, and of course Stephen in the book is a musician, another connection, and it's like all those NAs, you know. But then there was more. I mean, it's such a rare thing. that it turned out that his brother Stephen and his mother, which he didn't know about, were Christians. And his mother had been in Nagasaki, and his father had been part of the samurai clan that came and suppressed the rebellion in that area near Nagasaki. So that's where he was from. And so there it was, my connection to Nagasaki. I didn't know about this, of course. If I had known about this, there would have been a reason for Naomi's mother to be in Nagasaki, which I never knew about. But so there was this real life little story coming out many, many years later that tell me how connected things are that I know nothing about. So that I was quite startled by all these revelations about the Nakane family and the connection to Nagasaki and the connection to Christianity, because there's a very, very small percentage of people in Japan. I think it's something like 0.1% or 0.01%, very minuscule amount. And that brings me to another reason that I'm interested in Nagasaki, because I found out about Nagasaki's history much later after the book was written. I didn't know anything about this when I wrote the book. But gently to Nagasaki, that strange place on that strange day when that strange thing happened. That bomb that fell on Nagasaki was not intended for Nagasaki. It was intended, first of all, for Kokura, another place. There were so many things happening on that day that the bomb fell. First of all, that plane that started off, they were going to do it 2 days later, but the weather conditions were such, forecast was such that they put it ahead. And when they got, just as they were getting airborne, they realized that the fuel pump to one of the large tanks was faulty, so all that fuel was not available to them. So it was a precarious journey, and it was overloaded. So anyway, there they took off. And they were supposed to meet another plane at a rendezvous point, and the plane didn't come. There were 3 planes to meet, and the third one didn't show up. So they were circling and waiting for the plane, which they were not supposed to do because they didn't have enough fuel to start with. And so they used up more fuel. By this time, things were really dangerous, but instead of going back, which another pilot might have done, they kept going. At Kokura, what had happened was there was smoke cover, so they couldn't see because they were supposed to see before they dropped the bomb. So because they couldn't see, kept going. And they headed for Tokiwa Bridge at Nagasaki. There were other towers, but anyway, that's where they were going to go. And again, there was a lot of cloud cover and they couldn't see, so they didn't know what to do, because if they couldn't see, they couldn't drop the bomb. That's what they were ordered to do. And so by now, they knew they were going to have to drop it because they didn't have enough fuel and they couldn't land and they couldn't get back to Tinian Island. So they were readying to just drop. And at 11:02, the clouds parted, they saw the ground, and they dropped it. And where they dropped it is the strangest thing, because they dropped it in a place called the Urakami Valley. And that valley was the place where the hidden Christians in Japan had finally come home to. And they had established there the preeminent spot of Christianity in all of East Asia. So they had a cathedral there, which could house 5,000 people could attend that church. That's how large it was. It was the most magnificent thing in all of East Asia. This is the preeminent spot. That, exactly there, right there, less than 2 blocks away from that cathedral is where Ground Zero was. So isn't that strange? That out of the Christian West came this bomb that killed their best friends in all of East Asia. So what does that mean? It's got to mean something. Now people will say that after the Holocaust in Europe, you cannot dignify these atrocities by having meaning to them. In fact, the meaning is that there is no meaning to that. But I'm one of those human beings that struggles for meaning. The meaning that there is no meaning is one meaning. And the meaning that I attach to that is a notion. It's a strange notion, and I've imposed it on my life. But the meaning for me is that The man who Christians believe in and follow is the one who said, love your enemy. But I think on that event, at that event, what was underlying that commandment, that proscription, was transformed. And it's no longer a proscription, it's a description. You don't have to love your enemy. You already do. You just don't know that you do. So, Nagasaki means that to me, and that's why I'm going gently to Nagasaki, that heart of where that is, so that I can find in what way I love my enemy. This life then is not, this book, if it ever becomes a book, is one of discovering how that is true. And I cling to that, and I say, it's a notion, it's only a notion. It may not make sense to anybody else, but it makes sense to me, and I cling to that. This notion that this person who hates me, this person that I'm so mad at, is really my best friend. Now, how can I find out whether that's true? So that's the road. And along that road, to the heart of that, to the presence of the goddess of mercy, to the presence of where love is and where mercy is, I stumbled into Nanking. And the way that happened was because my life is like a leaf in the wind, because I blow from one thing to another. I take this clue and that clue, and I batter myself around. And it just happened that one day I went to a play by Marjorie Chan, and that's what it was about. It was about a woman called Iris Chang, but she changed her name. It was Iris something else, but it was really Iris Chang who wrote the book, The Rape of Nanking. I remember when I heard about that book, and I remember thinking, I hope it's not true. And then I heard that she had committed suicide, and I thought, well, maybe that'll be it now. We won't have to hear about that anymore. Maybe it's really not true, is what I thought. I remember thinking that. I put it out of my mind, and I didn't seek to know what it was about. But in Marjorie's in play, and this is another digression, well, maybe I shouldn't go to this other digression. There's so many digressions in life, the wind blows like that. But I met with Marjorie, and after I saw the play, and we discussed a lot of things, and I read Iris Chang's book, and I listened to the reactions from Japan that wanted to deny the reality of it, but you can't. It's just wrong to deny things that are true. And they say that there are all these steps along the road to genocide, there are all these steps along the road to war, and they're like tectonic plates that are starting to shift, and you can't see them because human beings can't see. And we begin to identify people and separate them out, and they're different, and they're this and they're that, and you push them away, and that's when the tectonic plates are moving. And we need to know when the earthquake is on its way. We need to know sooner than we do when it begins to come to us that we are making an enemy out of a best friend. And so, where was I about this? There's a trend, Nanking. All right, anyway, I read things about Nanking. I searched Google, I went to the library, and I became filled with this story of what had happened, the Japan of the Second World War in Asia before it all happened to us here. But way back there in 1937, in December, in Nanking, the Japan of the three alls, the kill all, burn all, loot all, that barbarity of all that, the 10,000 people pits, it defies imagining how it was possible to turn human beings into logs that you just can cut to bits and not know, to refuse to see, to destroy your conscience, to follow some authority that tells you not to be human. Whatever all that was about, it has not been adequately redressed. It has not been adequately acknowledged or taught in the world, and particularly in a country that I deeply love, which is Japan. And the children need to know the truth so that they can become strong, because it's only knowing what is true and being able to go into that hell within oneself that one can be free. Otherwise, we are in cages and we are in prison. So for the sake of the children of Japan, and for the sake of the people in China that remember with such rage and with such pain and suffering, I need to have that story told. And I'm told that if I do this, I am Japan bashing, but I don't think so. You don't bash what you love. You want healing for that. And I mean, what happened to us as Japanese Canadians is that those politicians who knew what had happened saw us as a cruel, evil, barbaric race. And I know that what I've read is that there were, whatever percentage it was, there was a certain percentage of people who really believed that we're genetically, biologically, inherently cruel. And the culture was, and we were descendants of that culture, and so a politician could say something like, do you imagine that a people can be one generation removed from savagery and still be civilized? So they didn't imagine that we could be civilized. And so, of course, the tectonic plates were shifting in our country, and we were separated out, and we were put aside. One of the first steps on the march to the catastrophes that can happen. And they happen all over the world, all these things. Well, that's Nanking, and that's Nagasaki. And in these two cities, there were two individuals that will not release me or let me go. Starting with Nanking, there was a woman there called Minnie Vautrin, and she was a missionary who ran the Ginling College of Arts and Science for Women. And she, with John Rabe, who was a good Nazi, created the safety zone. And they spent their time saving lives. And Minnie Vautrin has a journal in which she writes about this unspeakable thing that was going on there. The rape and the murder and the pillaging of thousands of people. And there are films out right now, and I just saw one last weekend at this event, the 75th anniversary of the rape of Nanking. And the film, I don't remember what it was called, it came in just as the titles went by, but in that film, I saw some of the things that were going on. And as a person of Japanese ancestry, it made me feel not just shame or horror or pain, but a kind of dread. Because I could see how anybody coming out of that film would just hate the Japanese and hate. It would be that. You couldn't help it because it was so horrible. But it was true. So what do we do with that? I don't think we can turn aside from what is true. And when you think about, you can't equivocate, you can't diminish the suffering of another by any kind of anything really, except your own grief that you share with the people that were victimized. There's no point in defending oneself from another person's deep grief. You just join it. And when you join that grief, I think there is a chance for healing. There is a chance for reconciliation when we can be with the other who never was an enemy anyway. And oneself, if you have done this unspeakable thing and you don't understand how you could have done it, you go back and you try to understand and you come forth with it. You don't, they say that denial is the last stage of the actions of genocide. There's all these stages in between, and the final one is to say it didn't happen. And one can't do that, because if you live in denial, you are living in a house that's made of veneer, and it is not safe. It's not on a foundation that you can stand on. You're living on dangerous ground. You're living on an earthquake if you're living in denial. So, that's Nanking. That's the safety zone. The safety zone that was, oh, this is my pal. Come in. Please, John, come in. I have just announced you as my pal. Do you want to go out again? No. Anyway, so I've talked about Nanking and Nagasaki and Mini Vautrin, and the other person that was in Nagasaki that has gripped my heart and will not let me go is Dr. Takashi Nagai. He was a nuclear physicist. He was the Dean of Radiology at the University of Nagasaki. He was married to a daughter of one of the martyrs and founders, or whatever they're called, the priests who were primarily in charge of the hidden Christians. Her name was Midori, and so she was there right where the bomb fell, of course, because that's where she lived. He was at the university when the bomb fell. And so he was the most amazing man. And initially, when I started off on this road, it was to his heart I wanted to go. Because he had been working in radiology, he was the Dean of Radiology, for years and years, and he had leukemia. So he was given 3 years to live at the time that the bomb fell. And he survived. He described the whole thing. He described what happened. And how he rallied, the few people that had also survived. It was just absolutely overwhelming to be there that close to it and just wake up and to come to and then to see what had happened. He was under a lot of debris, and he had a cut in his neck, and he was covered in blood, and so on and so on. But anyway, he was able to get out from under this, and he got out there and struggled and rallied his few students and nurses and doctors and professors, just a small group. And they worked just constantly to save the people. They made a decision that they were not going to go in there and get the equipment which they needed. They were going to attend to the people. And so they did, and they set up their, they went up the mountain a little bit, they set up their rescue station, and they worked and worked and worked. They did manage to salvage a few things. And so I read about him. He had become a Christian. He had taken to the readings of Pascal, and who was also, like him, a scientist and a mystic. And so there he was, ill himself, working to the bone, going. His book is called The Bells of Nagasaki, and it's a very inspiring book. And there's also a little book that I read called A Song for Nagasaki, which is about him. So these are the two things that really told me about Nagasaki and about what had happened and about this extraordinary man and about his... there's a little museum there in Nagasaki dedicated to his life and his teaching. And he lived in a tiny little house called Nyokodo, which means as thyself house. And it comes from that statement, love thy neighbor as thyself. So he stood for that. And he did not at any point think of blame or he said, who has done this? We have done it. And he included all of humanity. He was not the enemy, and he did not see the enemy. He had been to war in China, and he had seen, and he was completely disillusioned by that. And anyway, so there they were, Minnie Vautrin and Dr. Nagai, both of them in different places of refuge. The city of refuge, or the safety in Nanking, was not bombed because it was held to be a safety zone, and it had the big Nazi flag over it, which meant, or no, so it was not going to be bombed by Japan. And Urakami, which had been a place of refuge for the returning hidden Christians, was bombed. That is one of the differences between these cities of refuge. So then I've asked myself, okay, where is my city of refuge? And like Nanking and Nagasaki, the city of refuge to which I go is within. And when this book of mine that is not finished and may never be finished, when I got to what I thought was the end of it, I came to this amazing place. And it is my city of refuge. So how do I tell you about that? It's so wonky. But, this is the other thing, this other little refuge. I have one word. My one word is trust. I will trust. I do trust. I trust because I learn things in hindsight, because I don't pre-think, and I don't, because I'm not a scholar, I don't trust my mind to teach me anything, but I find out after. It's like running into that guy in Los Angeles. I couldn't have created that, it just happened. And the understanding about Nagasaki, why it was there, and that peg without a coat, that title without a book, all of that is something that follows. It's behind, and then I turn around, and then I learn. And so that's the only way I can learn anything, is action first, and then discovery later. And I suppose for a scholar, the action is, you sit down there and you figure it out. So that's action also. But my action is of a different kind. I just sort of jump over ledges, I risk, and I really don't know. So anyway, one of my wonky practices had been that, some people open the I Ching, some people read the horoscope. One of my things is that I have this little New Testament and I open it anywhere randomly. And then I take what I read and I think about it, or I write it down in my diary. Actually, I've stopped doing that. I stopped last year because on this one day when I was in Nanaimo with a bunch of writer friends, my reading for that day, I had said, maybe I should quit doing this. This is just too wonky. Too many things that I read don't make any sense to me anyway, and I don't learn much from them. So why am I doing this really silly habitual thing? But on this particular day, when I picked it up and I opened it to Corinthians, and it was, rejoice always, pray at all times, in all things give thanks. And I thought, oh, that's a pretty good reading. It's better than what I usually get from reading about something Paul has said. He's usually blasting away about women or something, and it's so irritating. Anyway, so this one was okay. So I wrote that down. And then I said, maybe I should give this up. Maybe I'll just stick with this one and think about this for a while and not do this anymore. So the next day I decided, okay, I'll try it for a month. I won't do any more of these readings. I'll just stick with that. And so then I thought, what does it mean, rejoice always? How can you possibly rejoice always anyways? You can certainly pray at all times, or you can think about, if something's really bad, you can at least pray about it, or you can, that Ken Kesey thing, I think it was Ken Kesey, who said, you don't pray? Okay, but there's your son, he's on the railroad track, the train's coming down, what do? You pray. Everybody will do that at that point when there's nothing else you can do. So he said, if you pray, then why not at other times? Anyway, whatever that means. So, pray at all times. Give thanks in all circumstances? Are you kidding? Give thanks in all circumstances? And this Dag Hammarskjöld said, what did he say? He said, for all that has been, thanks. For all that will be, yes. That's give thanks at all times. For all that has been, thanks. For all that will be, yes. And all that has been includes Nanking and Nagasaki and Auschwitz and Rwanda. You're going to say thanks for all that? I don't think so. But anyway, I said, I will stick to this anyway, no matter if it doesn't make sense or not. I will think about rejoice, prayer, and thanks. And what happened to me for the next 3 months is that I was in a state of euphoria. It was really weird. All that morning anxiety that I have, I've got it now, but I didn't for 3 months. And I said, well, this isn't going to last. None of these things do, but it's sure nice. So then on one of these days, while I was having this extraordinary euphoria, I said, this is what, in the beginning of Obasan, there's this talk about the underground stream going down and down to the hidden voice. Would I come at last to the freeing word? And I thought, well, that's happened. I've come to the freeing word. And what is the freeing word? The word is always, always. If it's always, I'm free. And so then I knew that the river that I was standing beside for those 3 months was the river always. It was always. It was not now. It was not here. It was not time-bound. It was somewhere else. And there is that somewhere else. We are here, time-bound, imprisoned by time, but there is where euphoria is. And I had felt that, I experienced that. Well, speaking about that helicopter and coming over on that helicopter, I, at the end of this, whenever it was, I decided that I would take the bus and go to Toronto from Vancouver by bus. So that was 3 days and 3 nights of going on the bus. And I thought, I'll do that as a meditation. These people that go on the San Diego, and they meditate. How hard can it be to sit on a bus? So I tried that, and it was wonderful. But what happened on that bus, I got to this place, and there was, I don't know if anybody knows Lois Wilson, but she's the senator, and she's the former moderator of the United Church. And I got to this certain place, and I got out, and Lois Wilson came running out of there, and she said, I couldn't believe I saw you here. And she was just going to get on the bus. And so we sat on the bus, and we went all the way to where she was getting off at, which was Sunderby. It was a long stretch. We had hours of talking. It was wonderful. And I was telling her about, this Rejoice Always thing. And she said, oh, that's the section I'm going to choose for my funeral. Those are the words I'm choosing for my funeral. So I said, oh, great. And I said, Lois, so do you rejoice always? And she said, yeah, I do. So I thought, really? So as soon as she got home from her vacation in Thunder Bay, I went to see her in Toronto, and I said, okay, you said you rejoice always. Here I am. You're my guru. You've got to teach me about that. And so I have conversations with her about that. And I think that's where I was going to end. I don't know how long I've talked. How long have I talked now? Long enough, right? No? Well, long enough for... What else was I going to say then? I think... my notes. I can just open up to questions, and then, if there are any. And, yeah?
Yeah, I'm sure there will be questions.
Okay.
Who wants to start things off?
And I'm deaf, by the way. If there aren't any questions, I wish I had brought part of the book. I could have read it to you. But anyway, since I didn't, you're going to have to ask questions or else you just go home, which is fine too.
Sure, Warren, yeah.
You were just a child during the war, so, but did you have any, were stories about Nanking part of the background, or was that just not talked about?
When we were in Slocan, we would
Yeah.
go to the Oddfellows Hall, see these movies, these war movies,
Yeah.
see these unspeakable things in the newsreels and so on. And so I knew then, but I sort of shoved it back. So the context, for what happened to us was there in the minds of people, and we were definitely the enemy as far as people were concerned.
Yeah, please.
How long have you been involved with giving these kind of talks?
Can you tell me about that?
How long have you been involved in giving these kinds of talks, I guess, on these topics?
Oh, you know what happened? I used to get, when I was a little girl, and I would think, one of my worst nightmares would be to be standing in front of people and not know what to say, and then if I willed myself, maybe I could disappear and be somebody else, and that other person could be here. But what happened at one point, the first time I spoke publicly, well, the first time actually that I ever gave a reading, I was so nervous that I just walked off. I just couldn't do it. Then the first time I gave a talk, I read it, and it went over well. And the next time I gave a talk, it did not go over well. And so then I quit. But what I've been doing more recently is saying, I am not going to pre-think. I'll just go, and failure is okay. It's so okay. And so sometimes it's a risk, it doesn't work or whatever, or I don't connect or whatever. And then that's okay. It's important to try. So how long it's been? It's fairly recently, maybe the last 6 years maybe, that I've been just letting it all hang out. So.
Can you talk a little bit about the Kagawa House and who has been staying there and writing?
That place, that's a miracle how that happened. I mean, I wrote about it in Obasan. I described it more or less the way I remembered it. I remembered it as this big thing, but of course it's a little thing. But as a child, I mean, it was a real house, and we never lived in a real house again, after that. And in Colville, I mean, it was a little shack. But anyway, the saving of the house was, I think, miraculous, and just, I didn't really expect that it was going to be saved. I knew that people were rallying to do this, but I couldn't, it was too much money, and I couldn't, I really didn't hope for that. I just was just going along and letting it go, basically. essentially just letting it go. So that was in 2003 when I happened to see it. It was on the day, the reason I remember that day is because it was the day that Mars was closest to the Earth. Not that it just happened that way. And so then, I was riding along with my friend and we saw this for sale sign in front of the house. And so really wanted it and so on, but wasn't to be, did a reading in it in September. And a lot of things happened after that reading, like the Naomi's Road, the opera happened. I mean, some of the people that were going to work on it were there, and so they heard the songs that I was. In those days, imagine 6 years ago, I could still sing. I can't now. Voices got really bad. But, so it's, I don't know, it lives, it does things, it stands for things, writers come and are there, and it all happens without me having to do anything. So I don't know much about things that are happening there really, and I'm just so grateful that it's there and doing all this. I know that I don't know if I'm whatever. I mean, it's the word is trust, as I say. So I trust and I let it go. And if I'm supposed to do something, I trust that I'll be led to that. But if I'm not, I'm okay. And this book, was it going to happen? I don't know. So.
Have you had any discussions with Japanese nationals about their denial and atrocities that the Japanese conducted?
Yeah, that's such a good question. It's not just Japanese nationals, but I think it's Japanese Canadians, that it's not so much denial, I think, as I think, in our generation anyway, there was such a need to distance ourselves from Japan, because we were going to prove that we were Canadians by doing everything Canada required of us, including dispersing and not knowing each other and everything. So I think to say that we have a responsibility for Japan, they would say, no, we don't. We're not Japanese, we're Canadians. And so don't talk to us about Nanking, it's got nothing to do with us. That's what some Japanese Canadians will say. And I don't feel that way. I feel that if I am seen to be associated with somebody else, there is in the mind of the other an identity. And I can't reject the identity that they have of me. I may not have that same identity, but I have to engage with that. I have a responsibility. So if a Japanese national comes to me, I am in association. We look the same, we have the same ancestry, and I can't cut off from whatever they're saying. So if they want to deny or downplay or equivocate or whatever they want to do about that, I feel the need to engage with that. And so I do talk with people about that, and we had an opportunity whenever it was, for me to have said more than I did, and I thought about that ever since. I don't know what those of you who are from our community feel about this. It'd be interesting to talk about that. I wish we could. I think we're here to do what we can to make a difference, and right now we know that there is animosity between these two countries where there should be friendship. And I think we could maybe play a small role as people in Canada. We have this unique country that is multicultural and allows us to be friends, even if the places of our ancestry are enemies. And from within that friendship, I think we can make statements. We can have our national organizations become mature enough that they can look beyond our own story to the contexts of why things happened the way they did and how the mindsets of the others are. In fact, we can become less defensive and more open, and that's what I hope we can do. But maybe it's a long haul, even with that.
You must finish your book.
I must finish my book.
You mentioned a little bit about some expectations of what the response in Japan might be. And I'm trying to imagine a group of students from North America and a group of students from China and a group of students from Japan sitting down and reading the book and then discussing it. Have you thought about how it might be received in various parts of the world?
I haven't really. I think there are real problems with it now. I think it's got too much stuff in it, you know, so I need a good editor or something, or I need to just go back into it and maybe put. I mean, I've tried to make it true in the sense that these are real people, which makes a problem in itself, and has been very hard to write because of that. And because in fiction you can take a part of this person, a part of this person, and make them one person, and that makes the story tighter and more malleable and manageable, and your emotions can play with that. I've wondered about doing that with this book, and I have certain obviously true things true, but mix in a lot of that. I don't know whether that's the direction to go in or not. I'm just, right now I've got it on the shelf because I've been doing all these other things, which is a nice break from it. But there's a part of me that says also, well, so I failed that book. That's a book's a failure. And so what? It's okay. And it's more important for me to learn the lesson of what the book is trying to, the notion that the best friend and the enemy are the same, that the enemy is the best friend, that I can't see it, that I have to keep looking, and that I find it. And there's not going to be a formula for that, I know, but there are things to discover about that, and maybe that's more important than the book, is to know the truth of that. And I don't know. But again, as I say, I learn everything afterwards. So it could be that failure is an essential, very necessary part of this part of my life. I don't know.
I wonder if you could expand a bit on this notion of cities of refuge and the particularity of that refuge.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, you mentioned refuge under the Nazi flag.
Yeah.
And that seems like an interesting notion all by itself, as a concept of refuge.
Yeah.
And what is that for you?
Well, the refuge for me is that inner sea, is that river always, is that being there and being at peace, and it's, if I'm there, then no matter what catastrophes are happening, there is a temporariness to it or something, there is something beyond it, which can be my place of refuge. So it's an inner city, and but I fail that. You know, I fail to be there always, and that's okay. It's really enough that I've been there once, that I've actually known that. And I think the thing is, you know, nobody can tell you about it. You do have to experience it, and then you recognize it, and then you know, and then nothing can take it from you because you've been there. And I think it's like that, and I'm so grateful for that I've known that. Yeah.
Do you think of refuge as escape?
Escape?
Escape.
As escape. Maybe. Escape is usually not seen as a good word, but I think if you do not run from the hell, but you run towards it, then I think you can escape it. It's It's this paradoxical thing. So I don't know if anyone's read The Rain Ascends, but that book was my run into hell, and it's meant the most to me of anything I've written, because by going into that hell, I had been a very sickly person before that. I used to just flake out and be on the floor, so ill. And it would happen, you know, in all kinds of strange places. And after that book, that was gone completely. It's never come back. So I know that going to hell can be a real escape, can be very freeing.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk more about the story from Nanking? I wish I could hear more about that.
The story from Nanking.
Yeah, this individuals who have captured your attention.
Right, the mini Vautrin story. Yes, I didn't finish that. Okay, she was this wonderful, wonderful woman. And she had this diary, and she would write things about what was happening. And one night, she... did I send you that chapter? No, I didn't send you that chapter. I sent you the other one. Anyway, she could hear these children, these little girls, on this truckload, crying out, "Save our lives," as they were being driven off. And she wrote in her diary, "The women of Japan would be so ashamed if they knew what their husbands are doing." And she wrote all these things. And I mean, where did I read about what she did? I can't remember now where I read. Maybe it was in Iris Chang's book, some of Minnie Vautrin's story. The thing about her was that she did this great, good work. And then she had a breakdown, and she went back to the United States to recover. But a year after she left, she committed suicide. So there was Minnie Vautrin. She was called the goddess of Nanking, but she did not have the power to save herself from the vortex, from the whirlpool. She was sucked in. And I think that's why, and to me it's a great mystery, that this happens to people, that they get unable to be saved or to save themselves. So all these lives of all these people, and I mean, John was telling me about a certain person, Victoria Chung, that has invaded him. And he's, for the last 5 years, he's been researching and finding out who she is and what she's done. And I have been invaded by Minnie Vautrin and Takashi Nagai. Marjorie Chan had Iris Chang within her. And so it's strange how we come in our windy little lives to certain stories, to certain people, to certain things that direct us. And it seems to me that when that happens, one knows where one has to be and what one has to do. And I think everybody has that, something that directs us. It's a little compass, and it moves. And I think that the whole, everything around us is filled with all these things that are here to direct us. It's a notion, another one of my notions. And that if we open to them, then we know exactly what we're supposed to be doing. I think I am supposed to be writing this book, but it's tough. And I'm not giving up on it. And it may or may not get out there, or who knows, but I'll just keep doing it.
This is a naive question from someone who's never tried to write anything but nonfiction. You've had great success as both a novelist and a poet, and you've been telling us about struggling with these stories. How do you know that it has to come out in the form of a novel as opposed to poetry? Does that come from behind as you describe it?
So the question was, how do I know?
How do you know that this is a novel as opposed to, say, poetry?
Or memoir, or whatever it is. I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm in this in-between place of not knowing. So I'm listening, wondering. And because I've got these other things to do, like talk here tonight, I haven't been working on it at all, and I've been doing other things. And so in a period of time like that, I think something is percolating, but I don't know what it is or what it will be at all. Maybe it's a book of little short essays. I don't know. I know one little thing that I've been digressing on is Dr. Nagai, who was a nuclear physicist, who, can I just tell you briefly about this? He was, and this is really confusing to me because he knew the worst use of nuclear energy as a bomb. He knew it firsthand, he understood it. He even knew the uranium came from Canada, and he knew what kind of uranium was the right kind, and etc., etc. He knew all these things. And even if he knew the worst use, he could imagine the best use. And so he had a great deal of hope for this. And so I've been struggling with that in the world that we've got, and with this huge anti-nuclear energy movement that is in the world, in light of Dr. Nagai and what he stood for and where he would be today. And what I'm told is that 97% of the nuclear physicists in the world today think we have to have nuclear energy. But if that's what the scientists are saying, why is the world not listening to that? I don't understand that. Does the world know better? Do all the anti-nuclear activists know more than the nuclear physicists? I don't know. But anyway, that's completely beside the point, I think. It's a side part of what confuses me about. I get confused about a lot of things. That's one of the things. So are we near the end? What time is it? Oh, if we still have time.
Time for a few more. If there are
Okay,
questions.
if there are. Maybe there aren't any. You can all go home. So can I.
It's an irrelevant question maybe, but can you tell us about your family background?
Should I tell you about my family background? Did I tell you about the Renaissance? Oh, my hell. My family background. Okay, we lived in that house in Marpole. We were sent to Spokane. Then the dispersal policy. And we went to southern Alberta. That's the parameters of Obasan. Vancouver, Spokane, southern Alberta. And that's the story. So that book is really autobiographical, except for having to stick on Nagasaki, which is not. And that was something that I I understood only much later, even last year, the whole story about Nakane. So my family story, okay. In this book, I write about the truth of it. And what I worry about is, part of the thing about telling the truth, you're told to be silent, you're told to be truthful, you're told to speak, you're told not to harm. All these things come in and you don't know what direction to go in, and that's me. I don't know. So when I was writing this thing, I said, well, maybe it'll never be published, maybe it doesn't have to be published, maybe, but I'll have to write it. So I was writing all this stuff about my family. And as truth. And my brother, whom I love deeply, has had a quadruple bypass operation. He's had a couple of strokes. He's supposed to have 0 stress. His wife is also ill. And I've been told that if I write about this, it'll kill him. So what am I supposed to do? Obviously, I don't want to murder my brother. So I wrote about it anyway. Maybe that's a good reason for it to be not published. Or I don't know. But tell me what you're actually asking.
Well, your ancestors and your parents.
Oh, my ancestors and my parents and all of that? You want to know about that? Where they came from? They met here. They met in Vancouver, that is. And my mother was in an orphanage for a while. She's an extraordinarily bright woman. She went to a very special school for only bright kids. But she wet her bed because she had been in an orphanage and because she'd been so lonely all the way into high school. But she was the most incredibly truthful, dignified woman. And she had become a superintendent of kindergartens in quite a large territory of Japan and came to Canada to be a kindergarten teacher here. And my dad had come from this very remote village, high up in the mountains, and I've only just learned that in that tiny little remote place, which I happened to see on Father's Day in 2010, saw the house where he was born. What I've just learned is that the Nakane that I was telling you about earlier, his grandmother had come from there. I didn't know that. And that there's a field there in which they've unearthed some pottery which tells us that there were some of the hidden Christians there. Maybe they'd gone there to flee. It's very strange, all of this stuff, as it arises. And if I were a sleuth, I'd go after it, you know. What is this about the hidden Christians? What is their connection to this book, to my family, to all of that? What does it have to do? And I don't know any of this, but these are little tantalizing little things. So he came out of Ehime-ken, the top of the mountain, way up there in this most remote place. His father died when he was 14, and the family was very impoverished, and he felt he had to go out into the world, make his fortune, send it home like Momotaro. And so at the age of 14, he walked down this mountain, miles down, and he got himself, he'd heard that there were these ogres on the seas that would gouge out your eyes, so he took a Neville route. And he went to Kyoto and he worked there, and he dreamed of coming to, Japan was this tiny place, he dreamed of coming to a big place. The biggest place he could see was Canada. He came. And he met my mother. My brother and I were born. And my brother is really a model for Stephen because of, you know, he had this gimpy leg, and he was this musician. He went to the David Lloyd George School, and as this little kid, he was so musical, he became the school's conductor. And he was in that special choir, and he could have been a great musician. He ended up a minister. But, you know, music still pours through him. It's my family. Other stuff I can't tell you about. I could, but...
A book.
Yeah. And maybe not in the book. Maybe it is. I don't know. Is that it?
Well, you have a question from behind you. Kat.
Sorry. I'm curious. When you wrote Obasan, I can imagine you didn't set out to write a book that would be on the high school curriculum. He's seen as a very important book for the redress movement. I'm sure that wasn't your plan.
No.
Can you talk a bit then about what happened after the book was published and when those things began to unfold?
Yeah. Well, astonishment is nervousness, disbelief. Okay, so it's true. I didn't know whether the book was ever going to be published. I didn't know whether anybody would be interested in a story about Japanese Canadians. I mean, the first story that I wrote was called Are There Any Shoes in Heaven? And it was about a family called the Parkins, who were tall, blonde, kind of Nordic type people. And they had left the mountains to go to southern Alberta. And the little boy in this story, who was also a little blonde male, hated the prairies so much he wanted to go back to the mountains. That's a Japanese Canadian story, but the characters were not. And so, I mean, I couldn't imagine writing about Japanese Canadians. Never read a single thing about them. Who were they? Besides, I wasn't one, so I was white. So I was obviously writing about white people, since I was one of them. And so that was my first story. And when I was writing Oba-san, I think I was still at a stage in life when I was really mad at my mother, and I was trying to work that out, and so I wrote about Oba-san as a short story. And then I followed a certain dream, and I ended up at the archives, and I found Muriel Kitagawa's letters. Never met anybody like her, so I wrote about her. And I was going to call her Aunt Muriel, but I thought I'd better not, since I didn't know anything about her. So I called her Aunt Emily. And so then this book, I sent it around, and everybody refused it. Nobody was going to be... Well, they thought it was well written, but they couldn't market it because nobody would read it, and etc., etc. That's the kind of reaction I got from everywhere it went, except this one little press. And so then I had to find out what happened to the mother, and I wrote about Nagasaki, and so then it was published in 1981, and lo and behold, it won an award, you know. It won the first, the Books in Canada First Novel Award, and I can remember when I got this message on the phone, I was absolutely blown away. I was so excited, I couldn't stand it. And then I went to this award ceremony, and I had this white suit made for it. And then I was so nervous. And so I stood there and I said, I've never won anything before. And that's all I said. And then I sat down. And then the next award was the Canadian Authors Book of the Year Award. And that was in Kelowna, Kamloops. I always get those two cities mixed up. Anyway, I took my parents to that one. And I had a little speech written out, and I read that, and that wasn't quite so ridiculous. Anyway, so then I was really so happy to be able to make my parents happy, and but you know, I mean, it is true that the book has marched on by itself completely, and it's out there, and it opens doors for me, and so I'm grateful for it. But it's dumbfounding that it, you know, as you say.
Does anyone have a final question?
Bob, why don't you tell them about how we know each other and how long we've known each other?
Because it would make me look old. Why did you single me out like that? Joy and I shared a house in Kitsilano in 1968 or 69, when she was raising her two children and playing piano. She didn't tell you that she went
I can't hear a word you're saying. I guess everybody else can.
I'll put it back on you. She finished grade 12, I think, at least in the conservatoire. She's a pianist. I You didn't know that, did you? We shared a house at that time.
Yeah, I can't hear what you're saying, so I have to come over here. Or have you finished talking now?
I said you were a nice person.
What was that?
I said you are a nice person and you can play the piano.
Oh.
And you were raising your children.
I used to play the piano, but I don't anymore. And anyway, that was fun. We lived in this, my kids called it Green Acres because it was falling apart. And it was this house rented for $150 and you guys paid half of that for the top floor. And so that was way back. What year is that? 1968? Somewhere in there. That's a long time. And then, lo and behold, I find he's in Victoria teaching. So there are people probably I've known even longer than that, but it's 8:45. It seems like a long evening to me.
Well, let's thank Joy for her talk. Before you go, I just want to make a couple of announcements. Can I do that? No? Oh, sorry, Dave. It just looks so long. A couple of announcements. So this weekend on Saturday at 10 o'clock in the morning, Vincent Gornell, who's a graduate student in the history department, is going to run a walking tour that was inspired by this talk. And we had to figure out what Vince should do. It's in a course that I'm running to connect with a talk that was advertised as being very spontaneous and lived up to its billing. So Vince is doing a very interesting interactive walking tour. It will begin at the Solstice Cafe at 10 o'clock. Those of you and others who are willing to come will then brainstorm locations of significance to you in Victoria, places that hold powerful memory for you or powerful symbolism for you, and then the walking tour will embark on that spontaneous walking tour. So Vincent, I think we got it right, you know? I think that is the right walking tour for to follow up on this talk. So that's 10 o'clock on Saturday morning at the Solstice Cafe, if that interests you. I also just want to give a plug for the series that will start next semester. We have some very distinguished speakers who are going to be talking about the concept of healthy cities, what makes a city healthy, how can cities be made, I think, more equitable, as well as planned in healthy ways for their inhabitants. The theme is healthy cities. It's not all about healthcare. And those begin in January. There'll be a talk in January, February, and March. Let's thank Joy again, and I thank all of you for coming tonight.